She was the kind of woman who could feel everything. Too much, too fast, too deeply. Every glance from a stranger, every silence in a conversation, every smile that faded too quickly. It all clung to her ribs like rust on iron. From childhood, she was praised for her sensitivity. "You care so much," they said, as if it were a crown. But no one warned her that caring too much can be a curse, a slow erosion of the self. And no one, certainly not her, understood that Nietzsche once warned of the very thing tearing her apart, that over-identifying with others, letting their judgment soak into your skin, is the fastest way to lose your strength. She was drowning in approval, and she didn't even know it. By the time she was in her 20s, her whole identity was a mirror, reflecting whatever people wanted to see. She dressed how others expected, laughed when it was polite, suppressed her thoughts when they were too sharp or unsettling. Her life was perfectly curated, like a museum exhibit. On the outside, she looked successful, but inside, a question echoed louder with each passing day. Who am I when no one is watching? Nietzsche called this the death of authenticity, when one becomes a shadow among shadows, afraid to offend, too fragile to resist the crowd. And every time she compromised to be liked, she carved another piece off herself. The approval she chased so desperately gave her no peace. It only made her more hollow. It wasn't one dramatic betrayal that broke her. It was hundreds of tiny ones. A friend who didn't defend her. A partner who said, "You're too much." A boss who took credit for her ideas. Each wound was small, forgettable to others. But to her, they piled into an unbearable silence. She couldn't sleep at night, and when she looked in the mirror, she didn't recognize herself. Nietzsche once said, "He who despises himself still respects himself as one who despises." But she didn't even have that left. Her self-loathing wasn't fierce. It was numb. She had lost not just her voice, but the will to raise it. Caring had become a sickness, and its symptoms were submission, self-betrayal, and shame. The turning point wasn't some grand revelation. It was a Tuesday, and it rained. She stood in the middle of a street, soaked to the bone, waiting for a man who never showed up. Her phone was filled with messages she was too afraid to respond to. In that moment, cold, wet, invisible, she realized something devastating. No one was coming to save her. Not because people were cruel, but because they were busy saving themselves. And for the first time, Nietzsche's idea made sense to her. No price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself. She had spent years selling herself for scraps of affection. But what if she stopped? What if she cared less? That thought was terrifying. Who would she be if she stopped pleasing? What would be left without the validation of others? But Nietzsche argued that the strongest people are those who walk alone, not because they enjoy loneliness, but because they refuse to trade their soul for company. So she experimented. At first it was small, declining an invitation without guilt, disagreeing with someone without apologizing, not replying to a message the second it arrived. Each act felt like rebellion. But more importantly, each act gave her a little more of herself back. She started to notice something strange. People didn't leave. Some even respected her more. Still, there was resistance. Guilt crept in like fog. Was she becoming cold, selfish, arrogant? But she remembered Nietzsche's warning. Compassion, unchecked, becomes a leash. The world doesn't reward martyrs. It eats them. He called for the birth of the Übermensch, the person who creates their own values, who rises above the herd's morality. Could she become that? Not invulnerable, but untouchable where it mattered most. So she stopped asking if people liked her. Instead, She asked if she respected herself after each interaction. That shift, tiny as it was, cracked open something, buried deep, power. The more she withdrew from people-pleasing, the more clearly she saw the machinery behind social games. Compliments were currency. Kindness was often camouflage. Sympathy could be a trap. Nietzsche didn't hate humanity, but he distrusted its performative goodness. She saw now how people manipulate with need, guilt, pity, and how easily she had been controlled by the fear of being disliked. But now, each time she chose silence over explanation, no over obligation, distance over performance, she grew. Like steel being forged, her soul was tempering under the pressure of indifference. Not apathy, but detachment, the kind that makes you unbreakable. Her relationships shifted. Some vanished entirely. People who thrived on her compliance disappeared. Others became strained, uncomfortable. "You've changed," they said with suspicion. But she had not changed. She had returned. Returned to the parts of her that once dared to speak without trembling, that once knew what she wanted before the world told her who to be. Nietzsche believed we must become who we are, and now she understood that meant unlearning everything she was taught to be. To stand firm when others expect you to fold. To endure misunderstanding without explaining. Yourself. To be feared, not for cruelty, but for the integrity that won't bend. The hardest part came when someone she deeply loved turned away. He told her she wasn't soft anymore, that her distance felt cold, her clarity too sharp. It stung. But she didn't chase. She let him go, not because she didn't care, but because she finally cared about herself more. Nietzsche wrote, "The snake which cannot cast its skin has to die." And that love, sweet as it once was, had become a skin too tight to breathe in. Letting it die was an act of survival. Her tears were real, but so was her resolve. Love, she realized, is not sacrifice. It is freedom walking beside freedom. Anything less is a cage. By now, her solitude felt different. Not like loneliness, but like peace. She no longer needed constant validation. She didn't fear being misunderstood. She didn't flinch at silence. She had discovered the truth Nietzsche buried under all his fire and thunder. That true strength is not domination, but self-possession. And caring less didn't mean not loving. It meant loving wisely, loving herself first. She no longer burned, her energy trying to keep everyone warm. She built a fire for herself, and if others wanted to gather around it, they could. But she would never hand them the match again. And yet, the world did not applaud her. In fact, it grew quieter. Fewer messages, fewer smiles, but what remained was real. The noise faded, and with it, the anxiety. She walked with a different rhythm now, unhurried, undisturbed. She didn't seek revenge on those who took her for granted. She didn't craft speeches in her head anymore. She simply moved on. Nietzsche called this amor fati, the love of one's fate. She embraced the betrayals, the losses, the solitude, as necessary chapters in her becoming. She no longer cursed the pain. She thanked it. It had taught her the most sacred thing. Not to be less emotional, but to protect her emotions from the unworthy. But still, she remembered the girl she once was, the one who cared too much, who bled too easily. She didn't hate her. She mourned her. That girl had been brave in her own way. It took courage to feel so deeply. But now she knew the cost. Caring without boundaries is not virtue. It is self-erasure. And no one claps for your disappearance. The world only takes what you offer and asks for more. Unless you stop. Unless you say enough. unless you build a spine out of silence and start choosing yourself. She had finally, and now there was no going back. Months passed. The world moved on, as it always does. But inside her, the silence had become sacred. She no longer flinched at the absence of noise, attention, or company. In fact, she started to fear the opposite. The chatter, the noise of people who didn't really listen, the expectations disguised as affection. What had once felt like love, she now saw as control. What had once seemed like kindness, now felt like strategy. She had shed the illusion that everyone deserved her softness. Nietzsche warned that most people aren't searching for the truth, they're looking for comfort. And those who dare to speak or live outside the narrative often walk alone. But she no longer feared solitude. She had made peace with the quiet. There was power in her detachment now, a quiet kind of power, not the thunder of domination, but the unshakable gravity of someone who needs no applause. When someone questioned her silence, she didn't justify it. When someone called her distant, she didn't defend herself. She had finally understood Nietzsche's truth, that strength isn't about how loudly you speak, it's about how little you need to. She no longer flattered out of politeness, tolerated to keep the peace, or smiled through betrayal. Her indifference wasn't cruelty, it was protection, not of a fragile heart but of a worthy one, a heart that had bled for too many people who didn't know how to hold it. But there were moments of temptation, brief flickers of the past, where she'd want to reach out, to explain, to be understood. Old instincts die hard. The need to be liked, to be praised, to be part of something. It still pulsed in her from time to time, like a phantom limb. But now, she paused. She let the feeling pass. She didn't chase it. Nietzsche believed that only when we free ourselves from the herd can we begin to live authentically. And authenticity, she had learned, was often mistaken for arrogance. But she didn't care. Not anymore. The more she leaned into her independence, the more she realized how much she had feared being disliked, and how little that fear had served her. Then came the true test. A crisis, not of identity, but of loyalty. Someone she once would have bled for, called in tears, needed her, pleaded for her time, her energy, her attention. A year ago, she would have dropped everything. She would have run toward their fire, burning herself just to keep them warm. But now she didn't move. She listened. She empathized. But she didn't give herself away, because she had learned the difference between helping and enabling, between compassion and self-sacrifice, between love and dependency. Nietzsche said, "He who cannot obey himself will be commanded." And she had finally learned to obey herself. As the call ended, she didn't feel guilt. She felt grief. Grief for the years she spent performing for others, bending to fit inside their stories. But more than grief, she felt clarity. She saw now that boundaries weren't walls, they were doors. Doors that opened only to those who knocked with respect. She wasn't heartless, she was selective. And that selectivity, Nietzsche would argue, is the foundation of strength. To care, but on your terms. To love, but not at the cost of your sanity. To give, but never what costs you your soul. These weren't cold truths, they were sacred ones. And yet, something strange happened. The fewer people she chased, the more they noticed her absence. Messages trickled in, not out of love, but confusion. Where did she go? Why isn't she replying? The silence unsettled them. Her detachment disrupted the script. She realized how deeply most relationships are built on unconscious transactions. If you stop playing your role, the entire dynamic collapses. Nietzsche was right. Freedom isn't just about escape. It's about reconstruction. You don't just walk away from the old. you build the new. So she began rebuilding, slowly, carefully, relationships that nourished her, conversations that fed her soul, connections rooted in truth, not performance. People feared her now, not because she was cruel, but because she could walk away. And there is nothing more terrifying than someone who needs nothing from you. Nietzsche believed that the will to power is not about control over others. It's about control over yourself. And she had achieved it. She didn't react, didn't explain, didn't chase. She moved like someone who had wrestled with her demons and come out the other side, not untouched, but unafraid. And that fearlessness, that calm refusal to be manipulated, drew new people toward her, not out of pity, out of respect. The irony is that by caring less, she began to love more honestly. Not everyone, just the few who deserved it. Her love became sacred. Not a performance, not a currency, but a rare and quiet offering. Given without pressure, without sacrifice, without pretending. And the few who received it, truly received it, held it with reverence, because it was no longer endless. It was no longer desperate. It was no longer trying to prove her worth. Nietzsche believed that strength and love were not opposites. He believed that the highest love is reserved for those strong enough to hold it without needing it. She had become that. Sometimes she wondered if she'd gone too far, if detachment had turned to coldness, if her silence sometimes closed doors that should have stayed open. But then she remembered the girl she used to be, the one who cried in silence, bent over backwards, gave too much, and got too little. That girl deserved vengeance, and her vengeance wasn't loud. It was this new life, peaceful, disciplined, unapologetic. Nietzsche wrote, "Become who you are," and in her quiet way, she had. She wasn't a version of herself anymore. She was whole, and wholeness, she had learned, is the most dangerous thing a woman can be. The world will always tell you to care, to soften, to shrink. But Nietzsche taught her something the world never did, that indifference, when rooted in self-respect, is a kind of love, a love for your own soul, a refusal to offer it to those who haven't earned it. And now, she lived by one rule. If it costs her peace, it's too expensive. Her power wasn't in her beauty, or her charm, or her kindness. It was in her restraint, her ability to walk away, her ability to let go, not with bitterness, but with clarity. Because now she knew. Caring less doesn't make you heartless. It makes you free.